everyone. All right, it's Tuesday. So, fun news today. So I was checking out Twitter early this morning. Apparently, Human Rights Watch or some organization. It's like any of these other like human rights organizations, like the ACLU or some other shit. I'm assuming. I'm gonna try not to curse this much here. You know, I'm trying to make it safe for kids. All right. Anyways, they accused Israel of crimes against humanity or some crimes against Palestinians. So apparently this is the accusation of targeting people, accusing them of apartheid, I believe was the wording. My opinion on this is, why did it take so long? But at the same time, people for decades have been saying this. Unfortunately, in the United States or in the world, due to a variety of reasons, some of the premises that make sense in the framework of being against Israel are used in other frameworks, and that's led to people being under the impression that any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism. And I think that's kind of played into why, you know, things like this may have such harsh responses from people who don't agree. But if people did their research outside of the long drawn out thing, they'd realize that it's very similar. Apartheid, the difference between separating blacks and whites or separating people between each other because of certain characteristics, this is similar to South Africa when they had apartheid. There have even been some allegations against Israel for calling it an ethno-state. What is an ethno-state? It's usually a preference for your ethnicity, like a state where your preference is ethnicity. But in the case of Israel, I think a lot of people aren't aware of like the mode of like transformation that occurs. So what'll happen in case of like Israel and it being an ethno-state, and why people relate to South Africa, is Jewish people, most white Jewish people, conflate Judaism with being white, right? So it's not the same thing as an ethno-state. What you get is, you get people who are morphing the definition of a race, religion, ethnicity, and nationality. They mold those into their own thing, and it becomes this ethno-religious thing where Jewish actually means white. If you pay attention to the framework, substantively, what Israel or people who are in support of Israel, usually white Jewish people, argue, they argue for being against the well-being of brown people who are Palestinians. It is rife with racism, having preference for white Jews, and also a shitload of Islamophobia. And what Jewish people end up trying to do is they imply that Judaism, or a place where Jewish people is a place for white Jewish people. The reason I want to say this is, people who are part of a traditionally oppressed group, you would expect them to treat people who are also part of traditionally oppressed groups better, but they don't. The reason why I want to make more of an emphasis on the fact that Jewish people, who are usually white, isolate other people who are also Jewish, is because of the fact that ethnicity can be a constituent of religion, and yes, they've morphed all these things. But another thing that's occurred is with Israel is black people. So if you pay attention to the history in Israel when it comes to Jewish people, Israeli Jews don't have the same type of acknowledgement of like their religion than like Russian Jews, or in the past, there have been many attempts to hamper infringe on the well-being of Ethiopian Jews and Eritrean Jews that migrate to Israel. This has come from Benjamin Netanyahu, and this has happened in the past. They've also, black Jews in Israel are also the only people that I'm aware of in Israel who got forced sterilization. If anyone has more information about this, maybe Middle Eastern people did as well, Palestinians did as well, cool. It is objectively true that they were forcefully sterilized, the black ones. Within the last 3 years, before the first election, because Israel has had like what, 3-4 elections in the last like 4 years because the government's so fucking corrupt, and Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu is a piece of shit. In one of those, I remember I think it was the first election where he was making statements about being against migrants, right? But he was specifically talking about Ethiopian migrants and Eritrean migrants. And the argument that he was making was that he wanted to send them back, right? But this was against the UN rules. What the UN, when it comes to rules or sending back people who are migrants, you can't send people back who are migrants to a foreign country if the country is still in a war, if there's some sort of conflict still occurring. So that's against like UN rules or some shit. What Bibi did, Benjamin Netanyahu did, was he was advocating for it, but some of his senior members of his party or his coalition, because the far right party, Israel, the Likud party, who is far right, they make alliances with other far right groups. They told him that that would not fare well with the public. So what he did is he stopped that, but he made statements towards the end of that. He's not going to send them out, but they're going to figure out a way to deal with invaders. This sounds like very similar language that Republicans use for brown people who are Mexicans and shit coming into the country, or Trump when Trump is talking about people from Africa coming in because they're from shithole countries. This is very similar rhetoric. So not only have there been multiple examples of Israel engaging in actions that are indicative of an ethno-state, even to the United States, about some of the actions that they've engaged in being similar. The United States practices towards migrants is similar to Nazi Germany. And when you see some of the anti-sentiment of building a wall or trying to isolate people for certain characteristics, you do see this expressed in places like Israel. And with people who are in support of immigration, they use the Israeli wall shit as like a justification of why the wall may work. But if you did as of late, we found out that people were making equipment ladders to scale the wall with items less than like $4 altogether. So my views on it is Israel and people who support Israel, there's malice and then there's like stupidity. I think a majority of people are religious. I think a majority of people who are religious who support like Israel that way is due to some romanticization of Judaism and the relevance that it has in their religion. I do not use this framework of these religious people who support them: Indian Zionists, Christian Zionists, Catholic Zionists, Hindu Zionists. There are all sorts of Zionists. The Israeli white Jew Zionists, those people are some of the worst people, and they do it to their own people. Let's go back real quick to me saying that anytime someone tries to criticize, it's an abdication. It's you're shitting on Israel and you're anti-Semitic or something. There are even Jewish people who are against this. There's Israelis against house demolition. There are many Jews. A majority of Jews in the United States don't support the Likud party. Younger ones have a higher expression of not believing in the Likud party. The Likud party of Israel. In Israel, though, younger Jewish people do, because they're racist as fuck. Haredi Jews in the United States, many of them do not like the state of Israel, and they do not support a lot of the policies of Trump. If you paid attention to like when AIPAC came and there was some shit about the embassy moving in Israel and shit, you did notice that there were a lot of Jews who were Haredi Jews standing against it. And Trump used a part of the Haredi Jews who are part of the majority for him as an idea that most Jews are in support of him. But he messed with the stats, because most people who are Jewish aren't Haredi Jews. But even people who are religious are against this. Bernie Sanders, obviously, they dishonestly made it seem like he hated Jews when most of his family was killed under the Great Purge and shit because he's a Polish white Jewish guy. A lot of these things, you know, there's a lot of research that has to be done, a lot of misinformation sometimes when it comes to Israel. But in terms of crimes they've committed, in regards to them being accused of human rights violations, yeah, it makes total sense, and it is true, and it is a fact. Like, comment, subscribe. You have some other views. Let me put a disclaimer: I am not an anti-Semite. My framework is very clear with regards to why I have a problem with Israel. They conflate people who are in support of Israel and in support of infringing on the well-being of Palestinians. They conflate race, ethnicity, nationality, and religion. They make it, they end up creating that ends up being synonymous with white, and they end up shitting on people. I don't support this. And you know, they didn't say anything when Israel was one of the only countries outside of the US to have nuclear weapons. There's no other ideas that people have of really holding people accountable, and it seems like when countries have the ability to hold other countries accountable, depending on what they have in line, they won't. So I'm not sure what this will really bring, but yeah, it's true. So like, comment, subscribe, all that. GG.